Presidential campaigns are all about the states, and not all 50 are treated equally. And as we get closer to the general election fall period and the early voting, some states matter a ton more. Georgia is one of them, and that's where this interview will take place. It coincides with Harris and Walz doing a joint bus tour through there. Now, Georgia was one of the places that Democrats showed they could beat back Trump, not just in their supposed so-called blue wall in the Midwest, but they beat him there in 2020 and picked up those Senate seats as well. Now, this cycle, Georgia may not be any kind of must-win state. Polling does show a very tight race. When you look at the state polling, and I've told you how this works, Trump is up by about 4 points in a poll that has a margin of error of plus or minus 4 points. So it is a statistical tie in the Peach State. Today, we also learned President Biden will join Harris on the trail for the first time next week in Pennsylvania. Now, why does that matter? Well, you might have seen at the convention, day one was Biden's. Then he ceded the ground back to Harris. It's all about the future. And yet on some pretty key issues, domestically, the people who Biden did bring together in the 2020 coalition, Democrats who watch the convention and love the unity but still are wondering about how this all works, those are people where Joe Biden has a connection. He has a history. He's the only person who ever beat Trump in the Electoral College in a presidential race. So him getting out there for Harris is going to be at least helpful for her with the base. No one's suggesting that Joe Biden is going to be key to winning over new people or that he's going to do 51%. Indeed, everyone knows that's one of the reasons Democrats wanted him to step aside. But again, when it comes to these key states, Joe Biden going out there in places where the Democrats think he has a following and matters and continuing to show that this is a unified front, well, that's something that not only Kamala Harris draws on, but let's be clear, it's something that her opponent cannot draw on. We didn't see any former Republican presidents out in force at the convention, let alone in the key states where they might matter. A contrast to Trump and his lack of unity with the traditional history of the Republican Party. Now, there's also news tonight that Harris is making inroads with the flip of that coin. I just told you how some of these Republicans, including former presidents, aren't all in publicly for Donald Trump. And some of their aides are actually going towards Kamala Harris. This is new. About 200 aides to Bush, McCain, and Romney coming together, making it count in a big open letter where they say, we have disagreements with Harris, plenty of them, but, quote, the alternative is simply untenable. A retired Bush administration general also chiming in to endorse the Democratic ticket. And this shows follow-through with specific names and specific Republicans on what the DNC tried to tout. The idea that this was more than just one or two random people or one or two Trump turncoats, and we've seen many people work for Trump and then leave him. No, Kamala Harris is trying to argue that, as she showed at the convention, they have a lot of conservative, independent, and Republican support, including veterans of the Trump White House.
The Republican Party is no longer conservative.
I love my country more than my party.
Our party is not civil or conservative. It's chaotic and crazy.
I resigned from the Trump administration. As a Republican who dreamed of working in the White House, it was a hard decision. But as an American, it was the right one.
Let's turn the page. Let's put country first.
When she takes her oath of office, we will have a commander-in-chief that we can trust.
That was unusual. It was striking. And while the convention is something that many politicos live together, and we showed online in the coverage last night that we can see tens of millions of people followed parts of it, some of it was so big and exciting, and the Obamas and the performances and the musical roll call, that the Republican part there that I just showed you might not have gotten as much attention as it would have in other cycles. And I could just tell you, as a factual matter, we haven't seen a convention in the last several decades with this kind of contrast. Again, it happens to benefit the Democrats, but I would tell you the truth if it didn't or went for the other way. But we haven't seen a contrast where, as I mentioned, one major party candidate is completely abandoned by the former presidents in that party and former major officials, and is out there just saying, the state, the party is me, to paraphrase a little French for Donald Trump. While the other candidate is not only drawing on the united front of their party, there are obviously differences and disagreements with Bill Clinton and Bernie Sanders and a bunch of other figures, but they all came in together for Harris. And not only is she doing that, but she's reaching across the line and getting these other Republicans. Now, you've heard Tim Walz and others talk about how the Republican Party has become just weird under Donald Trump. And they mean that not only as a kind of a caricature or personalized insult, they mean it as the mix of Donald Trump's issues with his actual underlying policies. In other words, the way he talks and the way he walks. But I wanted to share something with you tonight as we see this news about so many Republicans coming in towards Harris. All this talk about the party turning weird, you can date it all the way back to former President George W. Bush listening to Donald Trump's inaugural speech during that shockwave when he first came to power. And he said, and this was reported at the time, it was, according to reports, The Hill reported it out, not the kind of thing you usually hear Bush say in public, that having listened to that odd, discordant, and at times angry inaugural address, Bush thought it was, quote, some weird-ish, some weird blank. We don't say that word on the news, but you can figure it out. So it's a parallel, all these years later, to Democrats saying in public what maybe so many people in the Republican Party worried about at first in private, stuck with this clearly, allegedly weird leader. Utah Senator and former Republican presidential nominee Mitt Romney has been more public than George W. Bush. Indeed, as you look at whether Donald Trump should get power again, let's remember these former Romney aides are endorsing Harris today, and they know what their boss said when actually posed and presented with this question: should Donald Trump have power again? And Mitt Romney was one of the few Republicans who voted to convict him for the insurrection all the way back in 2020.
The grave question the Constitution tasks senators to answer is whether the president committed an act so extreme and egregious that it rises to the level of a high crime and misdemeanor. Yes, he did. Accordingly, the president is guilty of an appalling abuse of public trust.
There's no question he has authoritarian rulings and interests and notions which he will try and impose. That's dangerous for the country.
Romney speaking out there after January 6, 2021, and again later. Dangerous for the country. Now, we hear so much about the blue wall, and Democrats have their work cut out for them. Tim Walz himself mentioned at the convention that he views the race as still down a touchdown approaching the fourth quarter, give or take. That's the blue wall. But what about the red wall? What about all the talk we've heard that Republicans fall in line and are loyal and Donald Trump is resilient? Are we seeing the red wall crumble? And is it not only because of the weirdness as alleged by President Bush and Tim Walz alike? Is it not only because of Donald Trump's problems? Is it because, in some small part, the opponent, Kamala Harris, is doing what Biden maybe was not doing 6 weeks ago? Saying, come on over, let's get this done, it's time to move on. I posed that question to our special guest, Amisha Cross, who has been all over this campaign race and was at the convention when we're back in 90 seconds.
Type 2 diabetes? Discover the Ozempic Trizone. Ozempic. I got the power of 3. I lowered my A1C, CV risk, and lost some weight.
In studies, the majority of people reached an A1C under 7 and maintained it.
I'm under 7.
Ozempic lowers the risk of major cardiovascular events such as stroke, heart attack, or death in adults also with known heart disease.
I'm lowering my risk.
Adults lost up to 14 pounds.
I lost some weight.
Ozempic isn't for people with type 1 diabetes. Don't share needles or pens or reuse needles. Don't take Ozempic if you or your family ever had medullary thyroid cancer or have multiple endocrine neoplasia syndrome type 2 or if allergic to it. Stop Ozempic and get medical help right away if you get a lump or swelling in your neck, severe stomach pain, or an allergic reaction. Serious side effects may include pancreatitis. Gallbladder problems may occur. Tell your provider about vision problems or changes. Taking Ozempic with a sulfonylurea or insulin may increase low blood sugar risk. Side effects like nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea may lead to dehydration, which may worsen kidney problems. Living with type 2 diabetes?
That's about the power of 3 with Ozempic.
Okay, y'all, we got 10 orders coming in.
Starting a business is never easy, but starting at 8 months pregnant, that's a different story. I couldn't slow down.
We were starting a business from the ground up.
People were showing up left and right, and so did our business needs. The Chase e-card made it easy. When you go for something big like this, your kids see that, and they believe they can do the same.
Earn unlimited 1.5% cash back on every purchase with the Chase Inc. Business Unlimited card from Chase for Business. Make more of what's yours.
I've learned something about my party, too. Something I couldn't ignore. It has switched its allegiance from the principles that gave it purpose to a man whose only purpose is himself.
One of the Republican speakers at the DNC, we're joined by Amisha Cross, who is an Obama campaign advisor, has been all around the campaign this cycle. Welcome back. Is there a crumbling in this red wall?
I absolutely think so. There's a crumbling, and it's more than just a quake. We saw in 2020 that the Biden campaign was trying to peel away some Republicans without nearly as much success as I think that we're seeing from Kamala Harris on the ground. And part of that is due to the fact that Donald Trump has been not only aggressively weird, but a lot of the things that he promised Republicans, they didn't follow through on. But in addition to that, people are tired of the vengeance and the grievance politics. They want to see an economy that works for them. They want to be able to afford that first home. They want to be able to get to the middle class and stay there. I think that there are so many things that Kamala Harris's campaign and her vision for the future offers that Donald Trump's just does not. And because this campaign cycle in and of itself, he has allowed himself to completely unravel attacks on race, attacks on gender, the crazy things he's saying across Truth Social. This is the weirdest campaign I've ever seen run. He's out here selling playing cards with his face on them right now. This is strange. And Republicans are finding it very hard to align behind it. Also, the more Donald Trump runs, the more Republicans down ballot tend to lose. They're not going to consistently keep trying to keep this man on top while he really pretty much destroys their party along the way. So I think that there are some options that they're looking at that include Kamala Harris. They're paying attention to the fact that they don't necessarily have to always agree with everything that is a part of the Democratic Party line, but there are things with Donald Trump that they just don't want to see move forward. There are a lot of Republicans who don't support the ideology behind Project 2025. They don't want to see a unitary executive. They don't want to see an America where there are no checks and balances for the presidency or the White House. And they definitely don't want to see a commander-in-chief who consistently stomps on the contributions of our military servicemen and women.
Yeah, you mentioned the playing cards, which I didn't think was huge political national news, but it is a thing that Donald Trump is back to that. A lot of people look at that as sort of in the whole pocket of grifting and self-promotion. And one could argue that self-promotion is a part of campaigning, but it certainly doesn't work very well if it's the core or the only thing you're doing. In Florida, Rolling Stone is reporting Trump campaign is running TV ads, not in some targeted area that they think is important, but actually just around Mar-a-Lago to help him and his ego. And as you know, a dollar spent could be a dollar wasted if it's not in an important place in the country, while Harris has pulled in over $500 million. How much does Donald Trump's lack of discipline play into this? Because for people who really don't like him, they might say, oh, he's always the worst, end of story. That's sort of the analysis. But you follow politics pretty closely. Donald Trump in 2016 did talk about issues. He did talk about people's lives. He had a critique of the swamp, which he claimed would affect their well-being. Here you have a 90-minute RNC speech that Fox viewers turned off. You have money wasted in Florida for himself. You have the playing cards. There seems to be evidence that he is at least less disciplined.
He is less disciplined, and this is ironic because arguably his campaign team this go-round is better than his